Greetings and welcome to today's education program in the webinar series of the Change Management Institute's Body of Knowledge by Sandy Furterer and Doug Wood. This is your moderator, Shobha Mittal with the ASQ Quality Management Division. And today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Sandy and Doug. Please join me in welcoming them. Dr. Sandy Furterer is a professor of practice in Department of Integrated Systems Engineering, is also the curriculum director in the Engineering Technology program at Ohio State University. She holds ASQ certifications, including the ASQ Certified Quality Manager, Organizational Excellence, Certified Quality Engineer, and the Certified Six Sigma Black Belt, and is also an ASQ Fellow. She is also a Certified Master Black Belt by Harrington Institute, Inc. She has published 10 reference books in quality, Lean Six Sigma, Lean Sustainability, and Systems Engineering. Mr. Doug Wood has worked over 40 years in the areas of cost of quality, office waste, root cause analysis, performance measurement. He has also taught auditing, problem solving, Lean Six Sigma, cost of quality, statistics, and failure modes and effect analysis. He has 5 ASQ certifications, and these are CQE, CQA, SSBB, CQPA, and CMQOE. He has 3 publications by ASQ Quality Press, the Certified Manager of Quality and Organizational Excellence Handbook 5th edition. This is also co-edited by Sandy. And Principles of Quality Cost Measures, Financial Measures for Strategic Implementation of Quality Management, 4th edition. His firm, DC Wood Consulting LLC, has worked with clients in manufacturing, healthcare, and transactional businesses. The company's website is www.dcwoodconsulting.com. And so without further delay and ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Sandy and Doug to you. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Shobha. This is such a pleasure to be able to present to all of you. Sandy and I really do enjoy a chance to get to talk to you guys and share some knowledge with you. In this talk, we're going to talk about the Change Management Institute. Now, that's not ASQ, okay? The Change Management Institute has a body of knowledge, and it has 13 knowledge areas. And we're going to go over some of those areas with you. You'll see how organizational maturity levels build on each other, okay? Because maturity level is one of the key components of making change happen. Another one is, are you doing various types? Are you doing project work? Are you looking at business change? Or is this an org change, organizational switch up in your company? You need to understand their framework. Their framework talks about context, and then they talk about practice, and then they talk about theory. So here's the cover of the book, okay? The Change Management Institute is a global, independent, not-for-profit association of change professionals, okay? There's their website listed there, and this is also in our, at the end of it, we'll have this reference. So the book can be found various places. You can order it. I ordered mine from Amazon. And again, it's a marvelous reference work. Now, it doesn't have a lot of text or writing. It more points you at different sources and information to cover this change management body of knowledge. So, what's their framework? So, first of all, they have 3 maturity levels. They talk about, are you doing projects? Okay, and this is the least mature. Okay, because everybody does projects, right? But project change management is generally contained, and you can manage it in one go. Business change. Now, this is a little broader. This is when your business is changing products or services, and you need to alter something in your business. But the deepest change, the one that requires the greatest maturity level, is when you're making a change in your organization itself. your leadership is choosing to take the whole organization in a new direction. So here are the 13 areas, okay? Again, we're not going to cover all of these. We would kill you if we did in 45 minutes, but we're really going to focus on these three. These three are, they seem to be sort of problematic from what Sandy and I have been able to determine. Gaining the engagement of all your stakeholders. This is something that, really necessary. Another one is assessing the change readiness of your organization. And of course, all of them are important, but sustaining the change is like at the end of it. How do you keep the change? How do you keep people from falling back and doing things the old way? So we're going to cover these these three topics tonight as kind of an introduction to the change management body of knowledge. So, to begin with, you need to identify and segment your stakeholders. How can you engage them if you don't know who they are, right? So you need to go out and, again, notice the numbering system. This is how they've categorized their body of knowledge. When you're seeking to know your stakeholders, make a list. That's where it begins. And then start segmenting them. Who are they? What are their interests? Okay? When you're looking at stakeholders, okay? Well, remember, you got the three different pieces here, okay? Who are your stakeholders in your project? You need to identify and engage your stakeholders who are involved by a specific project. If you're dealing with a business change, okay, so you're going to have more stakeholders. Identifying and building engagement from a range of your stakeholders that either own or they influence success or reinforcing this. And so you got to think a little broader. But if you're dealing with organizational change in broad-based, okay, now you need to look at internal and external stakeholders who are involved in setting your direction, maintaining focus and support for your whole organization's change agenda. So you can see here how this maturities, the three different levels, will alter how you deal with stakeholder and just how you're going to, what stakeholders you're going to come up with. Let's say under 4.1, there's another step they take you through, and it says, what knowledge are you expected to know? Okay, you need to know the roles of these stakeholders. You need to understand your processes and your methods, and what techniques are you using initially and on an ongoing basis, okay, to engage with these stakeholders. How do you engage them? How do you work with them? Reviews, how do you collect relevant information? And again, some people do a lot of this, and others, not so much of this. But this is the knowledge that's expected under this segment of the body of knowledge. Secondly, you need to understand the knowledge that is, what are the methods and techniques that you're going to use to segment, categorize, and prioritize your stakeholders' needs, interests, and concerns? Because, of course, there's a whole bevy of those. And you can't engage them until you know what their concerns are. Third, you need to know what these things are, but you also need to use these results to prepare for mapping out your stakeholders. Who are they? Where are they? What are they interested in? They're going to fall into some different buckets and categories. And once you're done with identifying and segmenting your stakeholders, the next step is to map them and apply some strategy to it. Now, there's elements of that too. Knowledge needed. We're not going to go through all of that because, we'd be here all night. But you need to map them and do the strategy. 4.3 under stakeholder engagement talks about managing your relationships and mobilizing them. And again, that's an action you're going to take, and there's knowledge necessary there too that we're actually don't have time tonight to cover. The fourth subunit under stakeholder engagement is to build change sponsorship in your leaders. You know, leaders are a particular group of stakeholders, and they need to truly sponsor and grab a hold of the change. We're familiar with the fact that you can't get anything done without leadership. Okay, you got to have leaders involved, and so when you're doing change management, you need to make sure that the sponsorship's in place. Okay, so Sandy, you can take over here.
Thanks, Doug. So I added some slides to share a very simple but powerful stakeholder analysis tool with you. Now, I usually, when I teach Lean Six Sigma, teach this tool within the define phase. So as you're putting the project team together, you identify who should be on the project team, who has knowledge of the process. Now, this applies to really any type of change. So even if it's software change or some type of organizational change, this will still apply. And again, it's really super powerful. So the first place you kind of start in your thinking, as Doug talked about mapping to your stakeholders, we have to think about who are the customers and or stakeholders. So we know from a quality perspective that the customer, everything is built around the customer, and we need to understand who the customer is, and we need to understand their needs and requirements. And this is true really for any type of change effort. We need to understand who has a stake in the change. And we need to identify that as early as possible. So this tool that I'll share with you in a couple slides will help you to do that. So the first question, who are my customers? Well, they could be your peers, and this would be internal customers, the person who sits at the next desk over, or the person who provides some work product to you, or somebody that you provide a work product to. Also, it could be people who report to you. It could be your boss. It could be other groups within the organization, could be outside of the organization, suppliers, and it could be other business areas. And of course, it could be the external customer. So it's really, when you're doing a Six Sigma project, it's about the process that determines who the customer is. If you're doing another type of change effort, you can think about, who's going to be using and impacted by the change. So who might use this new system? Who might be impacted by this new organizational change, and so forth. As we put more data analytics and machine learning and all of those analysis techniques in, it's who's affected by that. So that's the first thing that you want to think about. So Doug, next slide, please. Yeah, there I go. I thought you went backward. So this tool helps us to, like Doug talked about, a little bit of segmenting. This tool helps us to kind of organize and prioritize our stakeholders based on the ones that have the most impact to the process. So as you see this tool, you'll see that we identify who are the primary stakeholders that are immediately impacted by the change, that touch the process, that touch the new system, that are impacted directly by the change. This tool helps us to understand the stakeholders' attitudes towards change. This is important to do this as early as possible as well, and also their receptivity or resistance to the change effort. And then the reason we identify that is so that we can identify potential barriers and develop action plans early in the change effort to be able to overcome these change barriers, to be able to see the behaviors that we want to see by putting in these change plans. Next slide, please. Okay, this is Everett Rogers. Many of you have probably seen this, where he used a bell curve to categorize and group different people in the change process. And this was the diffusion of innovations. So his principle or concept was that as you're diffusing, you're incorporating innovations, and so this really can be any type of change, that there are those few that will embrace change very quickly, and that's the 2.5% way over in the left side of the curve. Those are the people who want the latest, not neatest technology, and cell phone or iPad and all that kind of stuff. Recently, I purchased an iPad, and I used the last tablet I had was just like, I think it was free from when I signed up for a phone plan or something like that. And so that finally wore out, and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go for it. My one son and daughter convinced me, and so we go to the Apple store, and the salesperson asks, so, are you going to be playing games? What are you going to use this for? And I'm like, well, yeah, I play games. And my son quickly jumped in because he was with me. He quickly jumped in and says, no, she's like Facebook games or things like that. She's not like a gamer. So she won't need anything big. So I definitely am not one of those innovators, the people that jump in there and get the latest and greatest product. So then there's those early adopters. So I'm probably an early adopter. Doug's probably an early adopter, just from being part of change for all of our lives. And so, we're pretty open to change, and we want to embrace change. Now, he might be all the way over there. He might have all the latest, greatest technology. So he might be in the innovators. I don't know. I've never talked to him about it. You think you know people, And then there's the early majority. So there's still that part of that half that's going to adopt change pretty quickly. And then you start getting over to those people we all know over in the right side of the curve, the late majority, who, they don't like change. They're in the certain kind of work that is predictable, repeatable, and that's great. We need those people, but we also need to know who they are and help them to get over past the middle of the curve, getting over there to the left a little bit more. And then there's those laggards who, maybe they won't ever change, and there's a special place in the world for them, for those people. But again, if they're on our teams and are a barrier to our process, we're going to have to figure out how to deal with them. Thanks, Doug. So we're also going to be identifying ways for mobilizing that commitment to change. And many of you have probably used an elevator speech at many different times within your change efforts to really help to communicate what's going on with your process, your project, your transformation. And it helps to engage the key opinion leaders. And I'll talk a little bit more about, I don't know if it was on this slide, hold on. No, I'll do this. Oh yeah, it was in this slide. I was going to talk about opinion leaders. So I might have talked about this a little bit in a previous webinar, but it's really great to kind of revisit. And I love the concept, and I believe it was with Everett Rogers that came up with this, but he talked about really having the need to understand who the opinion leaders are in the organization, because those are the people that people watch. And if they're making change, if they change to the new process, to the new system, to the new way of doing things, then maybe it's okay to change. In what's called a homophilous organization, that's an organization that is more comfortable culturally with keeping things very similar and not having a lot of differences in opinion. And so those opinion leaders will tend to kind of guard their opinion leaderness and they're very careful about where they kind of guide people to change. So it's that much more difficult because even the opinion leaders are careful. Whereas in a heterophilous organization, there's a lot more difference opinion, diversity, and thinking. And so it's easier to make change happen in those organizations. And the opinion leaders are going to be more receptive to going out on a limb and making change happen. And people are going to follow them just like they would the opinion leaders in a homophilious organization. It's just that it's easier to make the change happen when there's more diversity and thought diversity in the organization. Okay, so now here's the tool, and it's a very simple table. And there are several fields, and I'll just kind of walk through each. The first one is identification of who the stakeholders are. This is an example of an emergency department process improvement project. And the way we identified the stakeholder group is we really followed the process. And we did a SIPOC, and we said, okay, who are the people that are providing things to each process? And who are the people that are receiving things from the process? Who are impacted by the process or the change? And so that's how you identify those groups. Now, you never use people's names because people change, but roles tend to stay pretty consistent in an organization. So in this case, we have patients and physicians, medical staff, administration, emergency medical system, the ambulances, fire station, and so forth, registration, admitting physicians and consultants. And so these you can see are the main stakeholders, and there's a lot of them. So, and there could be potentially even more. So that's why, if you move to the next one, Doug, that's why we will tend to identify a type that gives a little bit of a prioritization, now only kind of the 50-50, but the primary stakeholders are those stakeholders that are immediately impacted and directly impacted by the process or the change that's going to happen. And so they touch the process or they touch the system. They're a user of this new technology or the new way of doing things. And so it's important to focus on those stakeholder groups even more than the secondary ones. So the secondary ones, yes, they still may touch the process, but it's a much smaller effort, and they're important, but it's just good to kind of have a priority on that. So you kind of know where to focus. When am I going to talk to the primary stakeholders? When am I going to understand their expectations and requirements? And so forth. So next one. So the next two columns are as we're talking to the stakeholders. So we've identified the stakeholders because we understand the scope of the change that's going to happen, whether it's a process or a system or technology. And we want to define the primary role of each stakeholder group by documenting how they are impacted by the change to happen. So what is their role with respect to the change effort? And so you can see in this case that ED patients are those that go through the emergency department, whereas physicians are those who provide care for the patients and so forth. And then the potential impact or concerns, we know this as the beginning of our voice of customer. This is what they care about, what each stakeholder group cares about. And this is a summary of the critical dissatisfaction and summary of the voice of customer. And how do we get this? Lots of different ways. But the first way, especially within an organization, is to talk to the stakeholders, talk to representatives from those stakeholder groups. Okay, next one. The last two columns there are where we can identify and track our receptivity of our stakeholder groups. And we want to understand an initial receptivity of where they are right now and where they need to be in the future. So for this example, the medical staff, moderately supportive. And where do we need them to be when we start making the change happen? We need them to be all on board. We need them to be really strongly supportive. So that's when we sit down through talking to the people, through developing communication plans, through developing change plans. We identify what is the behavior we need for these people to see from these people, and how do we move them to get them to be strongly supportive. So that conversation and the contact with these folks is the best way to make that happen. And I like this one because, you know, you can talk to people and you can hear a lot after meetings, you know, because a lot of people will leave the meetings and kind of go, oh yeah, that project they're trying to do and stuff. And, you know, hallway conversations and, you know, people may send emails to each other or texts, but the biggest way to really see the receptivity is just looking at people, seeing their body language. I remember being on a Six Sigma team, and there was a very high level opinion leader in the meeting, and he would be just the whole time sitting there, you know, the very defensive posture. He would put his head in his hands. He physically would like put out his hands as if trying to say, no, let's stop. He wouldn't be saying anything. He would just be having all this body language. Versus those people who are like the little kids in that picture. It's like, yeah, I am all in and I am so excited. Versus the student who falls asleep during class, right? Not that I ever see that, but you know, a lot of it is body language to help to identify the receptivity. So what I presented for you was just a very simple tool. You've probably used it, you've probably seen it before, but it's always good to think again and say, hey, this is why I want to use this, because it's helping me to identify who are the stakeholders that need to make the change, where are they in this process, what do they care about, and then how receptive are they now, and how receptive do they need to be, and then we can plan to get them more receptive if they need to be. Back to you, Doug.
Okay, so we're not going to go as deep into some of these, but the change readiness was number 6. We just looked at number 4. Change readiness talks about building individual motivation to change, and there's tools and techniques that can be used to do that. You really want to understand, is your organization ready for change? Okay, have you been doing change poorly in the past? You need to address those things, and you need to plan for resistance, because there's always going to be resistance, but where is it, and what's the reason behind it, and what are people thinking about the resistance? And you do also need to have a way to measure how effective has this change been. Don't forget about having metrics to do that. Skipping ahead to number 10 of their 13, there's sustaining change. And so there are development levers within your organization that can be used to make sure the change sticks. Okay? Leadership has levers that they can use. They can repeat themselves. I mean, repetition is learning, and leaders oftentimes have to repeat again and again and again, and people start to hear them after they've been repeating. You need to have a system to reinforce it, and that would be, you know, encouraging the right behaviors, providing people with some kind of a, you know, what's in it for me. You also need to make sure that you achieve critical mass. You often begin with making a change in one area, okay, and then you broaden it and you take it other places. But if you don't achieve a critical mass for change relatively quickly, people start to, oh, it's never going to happen, and you'll start to lose momentum. Finally, change needs, the new procedures need to be embedded. They have to be in the procedures. People have to be followed up. Are you following the new procedure? Do you understand it? Do you have any questions? People will often not ask questions when they first make the change, and then they try to use it. They go, well, I don't understand. Well, that's where the questions come from. And again, note the Plan, Do, Study, Act wheel we have over at the the right-hand side there. Now, there's other knowledge areas, okay, that we are not covering tonight. Okay? There's the context of change management, the overarching theories behind the change. Why change management matters, change in the individual, change in the organization, the key roles, and so on and so forth. There's number 2, defining change. What is this change anyway? What are we doing? You need to align the change with your organization's strategy. You know, the strategy says we're going to go and do X, Y, and Z. Well, what is that? And how does that change fit? Number 3, you need to manage change outcomes and benefits. You want to make sure that your change delivers the intended business value. You want to make sure that the benefits come out in your management principles and processes. You can use various mapping and analysis tools to do that. Number 5 that we did not cover is change impact. Okay, so assess the change's impact and how does it alter your change approach. Assess the impact and the risks and ensure you have business continuity and have contingencies during the change. This is particularly a challenge when you're dealing with a software update. And you're going to do away with the old software. Well, what happens if the new software doesn't work well? How are you going to keep things running? Number 7 that we did not cover talks about communication and engagement, creating ownership of the change. How do you communicate? How do you deal with various engagement channels and methods? And what activities have you planned to improve your communications? Number 8 talks about facilitating groups. So facilitation is a whole nother thing, all right? Consultants have answers. Facilitators have questions. And so a facilitator needs to look at the group and understand what the process is. That's their role. They need to prepare beforehand and then help make the group get through the overall process. Number 9, people will have to learn something. And so typically there has to be some learning going on while you're making change happen. What are their learning needs? What skills do they have to develop? And are you changing their behaviors? And they're going to need coaching. People are going to need somebody to go in and ask questions of as the change rolls out. Continuous planning, again, is something that needs to be done. What projects, what programs, what transformations are going on? Are you changing your governance structure? Typically, when you make a serious change in an organization, the old governance doesn't work anymore. There's the whole subject of human dynamics, okay? Everybody involved in change, they need to be aware of themselves, how they're feeling, what are they thinking, and how are others thinking, okay? And what is their interaction with others? This gets into leadership principles, team effectiveness, embracing diversity and inclusion, emotional intelligence. What is a way of having influence that's effective, and negotiating and managing conflict? Again, human dynamics, that's an enormous topic. And finally, there's organizational context. What are the critical elements that professional change managers need to know? Change management has a big element with human resources. So that's a massive piece of this. Safety, health, well-being. Are the change managers aware of the financial needs? Do they understand what kind of process optimization has to take place? And are they working this from a human standpoint? Okay, so that was the gist of what we're going to cover tonight. I realized that was a quick, it was a deep dive in a couple of topics out of the 13. But we had to obviously skim through some of them because it's quite a lengthy field. Now we're going to present a change management approach next year, which is designed for middle managers that looks at operational excellence changes based on literature and our research. Sandy and I are working with some others, and we're currently building a survey that will tell us how change management needs to work in a number of middle management operations. So, stay tuned for our webinar, which will be next year. This isn't something that happens right away. Here's the reference to the book that we were talking about. And here is our contact information. So, I guess, Shobha, you want to do some questions here?
Yes. So we'll be on this slide for 2 minutes before I shut off the recording, and then we can start questions and answers right here. So my first question that came up was, to mobilize commitment to change, would you recommend to have some recognition scheme to recognize effective implementation of change?
Okay, so you're talking about mobilizing the interest in change, getting people motivated? Is that the basis for this?
I think so, because it's asking, like, how do you recommend some recognition scheme to recognize effective implementation of change? So when the change is being implemented.
How do you know it's effective? All right, Sandy, you got something on that?
Sure. So I think some type of reward and recognition system is always really important in any kind. I mean, just in good management and leadership, just kind of period, but especially with change management, you have to reward people for being engaged. You have to reward people for making change happen. And, I don't think people are necessarily looking for a lot more money. Money's always nice, but research shows it motivates you for like maybe a month or two. But just recognizing people as they're involved, having town halls, leadership, calling out the people that are in a positive way that are involved in the project, talking about the importance of the change. It is always really important. Having celebrations every so often to stop, not just assuming, hey, we're going to keep just plowing through this, but to stop and pause and celebrate just with, simple things, with maybe some pizza or cupcakes or things like that. And the longer the change is going to go on, the more important it is to have these intermittently some types of recognitions and rewards. And then, of course, when the change is done, that's when there can be a more formal effort with, certificates and or some types of maybe then some monetary, a small monetary recognition reward. So I think it's really important, but I think it's important not to just wait to the end to do it, but to have it, throughout the change effort.